Paraná is really funny. It gets pretty cold. Like you wouldn't think it's that cold. It gets about 32 degrees in the winter time, which it's inverted down there, so it'd be during our summertime. Which I mean doesn't sound too cold, right? I mean 32-degree weather. We go through that every winter, except they don't have heaters in the house, so that gets kind of interesting. I would have to, when I was in Foz do Iguaçu is where you'll see the most extreme weather. It's where it gets the hottest and the coldest, just because it's right beside a giant body of water, and the city is actually surrounded by not only the waterfalls, but on the other side of the city has a giant lake that they use, and so just because of all that water in there, it's very humid, and the weather gets pretty extreme on both ends. It gets pretty hot too. It gets well over 100, probably about 110 to 115 during the high point of the summer, which will be right around Christmas time. And you'll sweat a lot, and you'll look for a lot of shade, and you'll drink a lot of water. Those are the best tips for that. So be sure that you bring clothes for really hot weather, and also make sure that you have clothes for winter. Not only clothes during the day, but clothes to be able to sleep at night. Like I had 2 blankets, and I had Under Armour, and I had a hoodie and sweatpants on, and gloves and a hat, and I was still cold at night. So you're gonna need a lot of stuff. Also, it rains a lot in Paraná. In Sao Paulo, not so much. Recently, at times it does, at times it doesn't, but especially Maringá, because of all the trees and grass, it rains a ton. And it usually rains most at the beginning of the summer and at the end of the summer. In that middle section, not so much, but at the beginning and the end is when it rains the most. And it downpours sometimes. When I was in Quebec, the Missionary's training, it poured so hard, our umbrellas did nothing. We were underneath our umbrellas, underneath a tree, a low-hanging tree. We were still soaked, and because it was raining so hard, my companion lost his name tag. It fell off and went down into the gutter and lost forever. So it rains pretty hard there too. You just kind of have to be prepared for everything. If you're from the Midwest, you'll understand, because it's a lot like the Midwest. If you're not, it's going to be a new fun experience. I didn't really know how to make rice before. Like other things I knew how to make, but rice I never made before my mission. In my house, we didn't really eat rice. We ate it like once a year, maybe. And so I never had the opportunity. I learned how to make rice. I learned, what else? You learn how to wash your clothes almost the old-fashioned way. Their washing machines work, kind of. So sometimes you have to actually scrub your clothes before throwing them in the washing machine. There are no dryers, so you have to hang dry them. Honestly, I didn't run into too different of food. Like I said, it's fairly Americanized, but there are some things that are kind of weird. Like, for instance, my trainer, so they have this thing that would be translated to redneck chicken. It's frango caipira in Portuguese. And what they do is they unplug the chicken and then get rid of the feet, and then they throw the rest of the chicken into a pot, and they just boil it, and then the skin falls off, so they take the skin out, and then like the meat just kind of boils in there, and they put other spices and stuff, but they leave the head in. And so my companion one time, my trainer did not know that it was this redneck chicken. He just thought it was normal chicken. He grabbed this piece of chicken, puts it on his plate, and then we sit down, and it wasn't even a member's house. It was actually at an investigator's house. And we get there, and they were having a party, and we tried to leave, but they're like, no, you have to eat something before you go. So we're like, okay, well, we'll get something to eat, and then we'll leave. And he grabs this piece of meat. He goes in to cut into it. He gets about like a fourth of an inch into the meat, and it just stops. It's like hard. And he looks at it. He's like, what's going on? He looks at it. He realizes that there are 2 eye sockets, and there's a little like triangle thing for where the beak used to be. He realizes that it's a chicken head that he grabbed. So that was kind of funny. He just looked at me, and he says in English, almost crying, I have a chicken head. So it's pretty funny. I personally I didn't really try anything other than rice and beans is different. There's feijoada, but in the South, it's basically pork that you put inside the rice or inside of the beans and mix it all together. So I wouldn't say there's food that's too much different. So I actually have 2. My first one comes from Foz do Iguaçu. I was in the mission in the Londrina mission for I think 3 or 4 weeks, and I could speak some things, but I was still having a hard time understanding everything and being able to speak I guess, freely. A lot of things I had spoken, I had to rehearse before and had to, I guess, memorize the phrases and stuff. And I just remember we went to a lesson and I felt prompted that I needed to share a scripture. And so I was like, okay, when my companion gets done with with his part of the lesson, I'm going to share this scripture. And like something happened where I don't know, I felt like it wasn't the right opportunity to share that scripture kind of thing. Well, we get out and it wasn't really a good lesson, and we get back to the house and we talk about it. Well, a few days later we go back there and we're teaching again, and I feel the same impression. And this time I was like, okay, I'm just going to go in. I can't wait for the right moment. I've got to make the right moment. And it was the best decision I could have made at that moment, because this lady, she actually had family that was a member of the church. She had gone to the church a few years ago, I think 3 or 4 years before this. She has known the missionaries for like 6 years, but off and on had been taught by them just because she wasn't progressing. And for this whole 6 years, she knew the Book of Mormon was real, but she didn't believe Joseph Smith was a prophet. She wasn't able to connect how those two, like, knowing that one was true, that the other was true. She wasn't able to connect that. No missionary had taught her about that. And so I shared a scripture from Matthew talking about the fruits and how the Book of Mormon was a fruit of Joseph Smith. And I just bore my testimony. Simple and probably very bad Portuguese, but she still was able to understand. And I just remember that the Spirit filled the room and she started bawling. And she said that she had been wanting that response for 6 years and finally was answered. And for me, that was a moment to realize that we shouldn't wait for the opportunity to arise to do something when the Spirit tells us to. We should make the opportunity. I sat there the first time quiet. I was like, well, I don't even know what to say, and my companion's talking. I don't want to interrupt him. But when the Spirit tells you, you've just got to signal your companion in some way, even if it's just cutting right in. You've got to signal him and start talking. The second experience, so typically I'm not a very confrontational person. I don't like to make people feel uncomfortable or anything like that. Sometimes I'm not very direct because of this. And I was in this interview for the family that I had mentioned earlier from the Christian congregation, and I had the opportunity to do the interview for the mom and the son and the daughter. And I just remember that I was so freaked out because my companion had done splits, and in this area he had taught them, and he was like, they're so awesome, they just need help to see that they need to be baptized, that they're ready, and that now is the time. And so I sat there fasting and praying like I've never done it before in my life that whole day. And I just remember getting into that room. I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to say, but I wasn't sure. And I just remember that each interview, one interview after the other, were some of the most spiritual experiences of my life. I opened the scriptures, and I can remember some of the scriptures that I had picked up before, but some of the scriptures that came to me to use during the interview, I don't remember. I don't even remember how I explained it. I just remember that the look in each of their eyes, as tears filled their eyes, that they realized what they needed to do. They came to an understanding. And like, it's really hard to explain with words what happened, but I was able to touch their lives, and it was so amazing because to this day, like, that was the only thing that I honestly did to help them to progress towards their baptism. Obviously, when I was transferred to their area, I was able to help them to remain active in the church with other things. But for their actual baptism, that was the only thing that I was able to do. But yet, they still thank me to this day. They still message me on Facebook. Like, they just went to the temple a few months ago and things like that. And they still include me in their life just because that experience was able to be so spiritual and so uplifting for them. So if you do get the opportunity to do interviews, I would suggest make it as spiritual as possible. Interviews will be some of the most spiritual experiences in your whole mission. And it's just awesome.